The night air was thick with tension, a stillness that only deepened the ominous shadows cast by the full moon. In the heart of the forest, beneath gnarled trees and shrouded in fog, something stirred, something ancient, something monstrous. A figure emerged from the darkness, its massive form towering above the tallest of trees. This was no ordinary creature. This was an Oni, a demon of Japanese myth, and its very presence radiated malice. The Oni's face was a mask of terror, etched with an unnatural fury. Its skin was the color of blood, glistening with a damp sheen under the pale moonlight. Large, menacing horns jutted from its skull, curving wickedly like the talons of some ancient beast. They gleamed like polished stone, each ridge sharp and jagged, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. But it was the eyes, those terrible, fierce eyes, that struck the deepest fear into the hearts of all who dared glance upon them. Fiery embers burned within, glowing with a malevolent intelligence and hunger. They seemed to bore into the soul, seeking out the deepest fears and darkest desires of anyone unfortunate enough to meet their gaze. These were the eyes of a predator, unrelenting and savage. The Oni's mouth, twisted into a snarling grin, revealed rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. Its lips curled in contempt, as though it relished the fear it inspired. Each breath it took was slow and deliberate, a deep, rumbling sound that reverberated through the forest like distant thunder. When it opened its mouth, the stench of death and decay filled the air, as if the very essence of rot clung to it. A growl rumbled from deep within its throat, a sound so primal it sent chills through the bones of anyone nearby. Its fangs glistened with fresh blood, a testament to its recent kill. Every muscle in its face was taut, coiled with the anticipation of violence. Its brow furrowed in a permanent scowl, the lines on its face speaking of an age-old wrath, as though it had seen centuries of chaos and suffering, and enjoyed every moment of it. The creature's wide, flaring nostrils seemed to sense the air, picking up the scent of fear. Its sharp, pointed ears twitched at every sound, ready to pounce at the slightest disturbance. The Oni's features were exaggerated, almost grotesque, but there was an undeniable power in its form. It was a being born from nightmares, its very existence steeped in malevolence and cruelty. The creature's claws, long, gnarled talons, hung by its sides, clenching and unclenching, as though the Oni were itching to rend flesh from bone. Its entire visage, from the horns to the fangs, from the glowing eyes to the snarling mouth, was designed to instill terror. It exuded a palpable aura of dread, a cold, creeping horror that seeped into the skin of those who dared approach. As the Oni stepped forward, the ground trembled beneath its feet. Its face, illuminated by the moon, was the embodiment of nightmares, a visage of primal fear that would haunt anyone unlucky enough to witness it for the rest of their days. The forest fell silent in reverence, for no one, not even nature, dared challenge the demon's dominion. Trees bent away from its path as if recoiling in terror, their branches trembling as though they, too, feared the wrath of this fearsome demon. The air around it seemed to grow colder, the very atmosphere thick with the weight of its malevolent energy. It had risen from the depths of hell for a purpose fueled by vengeance. Long ago, this Oni had been a man, a warrior, proud and fierce, but twisted by betrayal and rage. His village had turned on him, accusing him of crimes he did not commit, casting him out to die in the wilderness. Consumed by hatred, he called upon dark forces to grant him the strength to return and exact his revenge. But in his desperation, he had become something far worse than a mere man. The darkness had answered, twisting his body into the monstrous form he now wore, cursing him with eternal life, an existence of relentless fury. Tonight, the Oni sought to fulfill its ancient vendetta. Though centuries had passed, the thirst for vengeance had never waned. A new village now stood where it had once thrived, built on the ashes of the place that had betrayed him. The villagers went about their lives, unaware of the horror that lurked in the forest, unaware of the vengeful spirit that watched them with burning hatred. The Oni reached the outskirts of the village. Its fierce eyes scanned the dimly lit streets, focusing on the faint glow of lanterns hanging from wooden beams. In its twisted mind, the faces of these villagers merged with those of the past, the ancestors who had wronged him. The demon's snarl deepened, and with a roar that shook the heavens, it began its assault. The first house it encountered was made of flimsy wood, barely a defense against the Oni's massive claws. With one swipe, the walls splintered like paper, and the roof collapsed inward with a deafening crash. Screams erupted from inside as the terrified family within scrambled for safety, but there was none. The Oni's claws tore through the air, dragging one of the villagers out into the open. It looked down upon its victim, its snarling mouth twisting into a sadistic grin before crushing the life from the helpless figure with a brutal snap. Panic spread through the village like wildfire. Men, women, and children rushed into the streets, but their cries of terror only fueled the Oni's bloodlust. It was relentless, sweeping through the village like a storm of death. No wall could protect them, no door could keep it out. The Oni was a force of nature, its rage uncontainable. Houses were torn apart, and lives were shattered, as the demon's wrath left nothing but ruin in its wake. With each strike, the Oni fed on their fear, growing stronger, more vicious. It reveled in their suffering, for in its mind, it was justice, retribution for the betrayal of centuries past. This was what it had waited for, and no one would escape its wrath. The night grew darker, the moon now shrouded behind thick clouds. The village was reduced to rubble, a graveyard of the living. As the Oni stood among the wreckage, its fierce eyes still glowing with rage, it felt no satisfaction, no peace. The curse that had twisted its soul would never allow for rest. Its vengeful spirit would wander forever, seeking new victims, new villages to unleash its wrath upon. And so, the Oni turned back toward the forest, its terrifying visage fading into the shadows. The night had claimed the village, and now it would lie in wait once more, hungry and ready for the next time its name was whispered in fear. The demon of legend, the Oni of vengeance, would never cease. As the Oni vanished into the thick of the forest, the quiet that followed was deafening. Smoke and ash rose from the remnants of the village, the acrid stench of destruction clinging to the air. What had once been a place of life and laughter was now reduced to a wasteland of twisted wood and lifeless bodies. The survivors, few as they were, trembled in the shadows, too paralyzed by fear to move or mourn the dead. They knew the stories, the ancient warnings passed down from generation to generation about the vengeful demon that lurked in the woods, but they had never believed them until now. In the darkness of the forest, the Oni's fury continued to burn. It wandered aimlessly through the gnarled trees, though its mind never strayed far from the devastation it had left behind. Yet, the more it destroyed, the more hollow its existence became. No amount of suffering could fill the void that centuries of rage had carved into its soul. Its thirst for vengeance could never be quenched, for the memories of its own betrayal were like a wound that could never heal. As the night wore on, the Oni came to a halt by an ancient, crumbling shrine, overgrown with vines and moss. It was a forgotten place, much like the demon itself. There, in the moonlight, its glowing eyes flickered with something other than hatred, something darker. It knew that no amount of slaughter could erase its past. It was bound by its curse, a slave to its own wrath, doomed to wander the world in eternal torment. The Oni let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound filled with anguish as much as fury. It would wait, as it always did, for the next time it was summoned by the whispers of fear. And when that time came, it would rise once more, ready to unleash its terror upon the world. For as long as there was fear, the Oni would never die.